has done great work researching online and looking at different documents. And this is the beginning of uncovering of what she will talk about, the forgotten notices and the founders of Atchison. Madison came, 2 or so years ago and volunteered to help us with the archives, which was amazing. And then we had the opportunity to hire. So really helps me a lot. Our team is great, and I love what we're evolving into. So I'll turn it over to Madison.
Thank you for the great introduction, and thank you guys for coming today. My name is Madison Paul. I'm the archivist here at the Amelia Earhart Birthplace Museum. Today, I'm excited to talk to you about two very important people in the life of Amelia Earhart, her maternal grandparents, Amelia Harres Otis and Alfred Gideon Otis. Today's speech is part one of a three-part lecture series focusing on Amelia Earhart's family. Part one will focus on the Otis and Harres family as founders of Atchison. Part two will look at Amelia's mother's experience growing up in Atchison, and part three will focus on the Earharts. If you're interested in learning more about Amelia Earhart's relationship with the Otises, the museum is a great place to do that. Both of our tours will focus more on that. There's also going to be time after the presentation for any questions you may have. So before I begin, let's look at a simplified version of the family tree. This kind of shows the relationship between the people I'm going to be talking about today. I want to also explain the names I'll be using. So one goal of today's speech is to return the Otises to themselves. To do this, I'm going to be using their names, Amelia Harres and Alfred Otis, not Grandpa Otis and Grandma Otis. I'm using Harres because, as you can kind of see, there's multiple Amelias in this family. You have Amelia Earhart, her mother, Amelia Otis Earhart, who went by Amy, and then her mother, Amelia Harres Otis, who we'll be looking at more today. She used Harres as her middle name after her marriage. So besides being able to understand Amelia Earhart better through her family and upbringing, I hope to show that the Otises were who the Otises were as people, and that their contributions helped create the Atchison of the 19th century, as well as the Atchison we see today. Amelia Harres was born on February 1st, 1837 to Maria Grace and Gebhard Harres. Amelia Harris's mother, Maria Grace, was born on August 2nd, 1797 in Philadelphia. Family stories say that when she was a young girl, she would sit on her father's shoulders to see George Washington drive on his way to the opening of Congress, placing Maria Grace and her family as early settlers in the United States. Amelia Harris's father has a little bit of a different story. Gebhard Harres was born in Brunswick, Germany on June 11, 1801. When he was around 16, his family expected him to enlist in the army, but he had other ideas and fled to the Netherlands. From there, he found work on a ship which would bring him to Philadelphia. Once there, he found work as a toolmaker and a designer of steam-powered pistons. This is also where he would meet and marry Maria Grace. By the time Amelia Harres was born, her father had become one of the most prominent businessmen of Philadelphia. Amelia Harres was one of 7 children born into the Harres family. 4 would survive to adulthood. Here is where she would learn what it took to be part of the upper class, such as the importance of manners and etiquette and how to run a household. Her father, Gebhard, was also known for his garden, which is likely where Amelia Harres learned to garden. This house boasted one of the most famous rose gardens in Atchison because of Amelia Harres. Amelia Harris's sister, Mary Ann Harres, married Dr. William L. Challis on August 1st, 1850. The couple moved to Atchison between 1854 and 1855, around the same time Alfred Otis did. It is because of this move that Amelia Harres and Alfred Otis met, but more on that a little bit later. So what was Alfred Otis's life like before he called Atchison home? Alfred Gideon Otis was born in Portland County, New York on December 13, 1828. His parents moved to Michigan to farm sometime after his birth, leaving Alfred in the care of his grandparents. The family would reunite when Alfred was 13, when he joined his parents and siblings on their Michigan farm. By 1852, he had graduated from the University of Michigan, and 2 years later from Louisville Law School. He spent some time teaching in Mississippi before moving to Atchison in 1855 with the intention of helping Kansas become a free state. I want to give a little context to what Atchison was like in the 19th century. So in 1854, the Kansas Territory was established, opening up the United States and to the west for settlement. This opening also forced out indigenous peoples and broke treaties that had been in place for decades. Because Atchison borders Missouri, it became one of the first places in the Kansas Territory to be settled. On July 20th, 1854, men from Platte City, Missouri crossed the Missouri River and staked out the location of a new town, Atchison. On August 30th, 1855, Atchison was incorporated as a town by the territorial legislature. It officially became a city on February 12, 1858, with Kansas granted statehood 3 years later in 1861. Because of its location on the Missouri River and its access to the west, Atchison became a bustling commercial center with steamboats, trains, and stagecoaches moving throughout the city on a daily basis. When Alfred moved to Atchison in 1855, he became part of the first wave of settlers. Many were young lawyers like himself, and many, like him, moved to the Massasoit House. It was a 4-floor boarding house / hotel / stagecoach stop location on the corner of Main Street and 3rd. It is now a parking lot, but there is a marker kind of commemorating its location. In these first couple years, Alfred started his law practice and was a founding member of the Trinity Episcopal Church on South 5th Street. In 1857, Alfred signed and notarized the Articles of Association, which officially founded the church. 2 years later, he founded his law firm, partnering with George W. Glick, a future Kansas State Senator. In 1859, Alfred was still residing at the Massasoit House. This is the same year Abraham Lincoln visited Atchison to give his speech. And while Lincoln was here, he stayed at the Massasoit House, placing him and Alfred in the same place at the same time. We don't know if they ever met, but it is a possibility. Alfred would call the Massasoit House home until 1862, when he moved into his new house with his wife, Amelia Harres. So it's not known exactly when or how Alfred and Amelia Harres met. What we do know is that Amelia Harres was visiting her sister, Mary Ann Chalice, and her family here in Atchison around 1860, when she met Alfred. In 1861, Alfred bought the land this house sits on, plus a little bit more, possibly signifying their engagement. And in 1862, the couple would travel to Philadelphia to get married before moving into their new home. This is the Atchison Alfred and Amelia Harres saw and later helped to build. Besides actively being a part of the economic and political growth in Atchison, they were also close with other prominent members of the community. You have the business relationship between Alfred and George W. Glick, but you also have people like Amelia Harris's sister's brother-in-law, Luther C. Chalice, who used his law office here in Atchison to hold the meeting that led to the formal incorporation of the Atchison, Topeka, and Santa Fe Railroad in 1860. The couple also hosted many prominent members of Atchison in their house and financially supported organizations like the Trinity Episcopal Church and the Kansas State Orphanage. They were also part of the bigger history of the United States. Shortly after their marriage, the Civil War came knocking on their door. Alfred would join the Union Army, specifically Company B of the 18th Infantry, under Captain Thomas Murphy and Colonel N. Quigg. I haven't been able to find information about what he may have experienced during the Civil War. However, it is the same company that George W. Glick was a part of. I do want to note that other publications have placed Alfred in the 8th Volunteer Infantry. I have not been able to find his name associated with them. It doesn't mean that he wasn't, it just means that I haven't found those records. When he returned around 1865, he continued with his law practice and supporting and growing his family. Between 1863 and 1872, Amelia Harres and Alfred would welcome 6 children into their family. One would go on to be the mother of Amelia Earhart. In 1873, Alfred would become a judge for the 2nd Judicial District, and 3 years later, the president of Atchison Savings Bank, solidifying himself as an influential member of Atchison society. Amelia Harres and Alfred Otis worked hard to make an impact on Atchison. Alfred worked in places that gave him influence, while both Amelia Harres and Alfred entertained and connected with other influential leaders. They also helped establish institutions that are still present today. And it is these actions that put them in the group of founders of Atchison. Here are some of my citations and research that I used. We do have 2 of the sources in our gift shop if you are interested in learning a little bit more. Thank you. Are there any questions?
I thought it was interesting when you were looking stuff up that there was conflicting information about the 18th infantry versus the 8th, but she was in there digging, and it was fun to listen to her find things and talk about it. We learn from each other.
Yes, yes.
It's fun to imagine how grand the town was back then and how important it was.
Mm-hmm. Like, we have one of the first post offices built in, I don't know if it was Kansas, but in the area, because it was such a center connecting the east to the west. So that's why our post office is so magnificent today.
Yeah, if you go in there, I don't know where you ladies are from, but it's neat to just walk in and see the doors and woodwork.
And they have some pictures in the post office that kind of shows what it looked like in the 19th, early 20th century.
So, this house, their house, was like one of the first houses of Atchison that however is still standing. Is that?
There wasn't a lot of houses around us. We had different maps from different times.
Yes. So Alfred Otis bought the land, I believe, at least the house that's across from us, and then also the land, the bluffs, that was his land as well, and so that hadn't been developed yet. There were a lot of houses. Between 1855 and 1861, there was some development, but yeah, some of them have been torn down. Fires have happened. Yes.
So when they were living here from 1860, thanks for the presentation, by the way, it was great. Did he, or did his wife, did Amelia Harres and Otis, did they go back to Philadelphia much after they got married there at all?
That's a great question. I don't believe so. So after they moved here in 1863, Amelia Harris's father, when he was visiting, passed away in Atchison, and then her mother, Mariah Grace, came to live with the family, and so they sold the house and all of the land and all the belongings in their Philadelphia home. So I don't believe that they made a lot more treks back there, but it is possible.
So did Amelia Harris's mother live with them
Yes.
here in this house?
Yes. She passed away a year or two before Amelia Earhart was born. So Amelia Earhart never knew her, but her mother lived. Amelia Earhart's mother definitely grew up with Mariah Grace in the house.
Yeah, and Amelia and the family would travel from their Kansas City house on the train over here a lot because it was an hour and a half.
It was like 90 minutes, and Amelia Earhart's father worked for the railroad, and so they got free tickets, which makes travel, it incentivizes you to travel more, right? You don't have to pay for your ticket.
Did Otis ever talk about or leave any note as to on his travels as a younger man when he arrived here in 1855, 1856 or whatever
I
year,
haven't-
why he chose this spot, why he decided to settle in Atchison? Did he leave any note as to why?
So he did. I know that he moved to Kansas in the effort to help it make Kansas a free state. I think Atchison was the popular choice at the time just because it was like Kansas wasn't a state yet, and this was where everybody was moving, and a lot of young lawyers moved here as well. I don't have specific information, like stories of what his life was like in those early days. He didn't seem to leave a lot of records, which kind of makes sense because of he was a judicial judge, and he was in a place like a piece of political power. And so I feel like he was really good at crafting the narrative that he wanted to share.
And then the current location of the Atchison County Courthouse in town here, is that the same? Was it a different building when he was a judge or a different location?
That's a great question. I don't
That
have
was
the
one of the early
information.
buildings too, I think, like the post office, and I looked at that, but I don't remember the date. But that's one of the older ones too. And plus, we had more millionaires living here as it developed than Kansas City.
Yeah.
But they didn't want to put in, what do you call it, for trains, they didn't want to put a station where like a Union station has for the train to come in. They didn't want that here. They thought it would bring,
That's too bad.
people that, they didn't want to deal with.
Which is interesting because they did have a train station that had like hotel rooms and places for people to stay. So I'm not quite sure why that they decided not to
Didn't want to pay
build
for
a
bridge.
new
Didn't
station.
want to build a bridge, pay for the bridge or something.
Well, and I think they thought that, vagabonds, and they have those kind of ideas of some people getting off and into their city.
So I'm sorry that the Massasoit isn't still standing. That would be a great piece of history
Yeah,
to
that-
see.
Yeah, and the relatives, the Townsends, I talked to Fred, and he was upset because their house got torn down. The kid said, "Oh, we could have had 2 museums. Our house is gone."
At least this is.
And I understand that's a portrait of Amelia Harres, is that right?
Yes, that
This
is.
is Amelia Earhart.
Yeah.
Wow.
When she was younger.
So would that have been around the time that she got married?
Yes. Oh, I'd imagine so. But maybe a little bit older.
Yeah.
Possibly. I'm trying to remember what
And if there
date.
is a date.
I don't.
Oh, it's on the wall.
Because it's quite a grand portrait.
It says the date on the wall.
Yes.
What does it say?
Probably after.
It says Grandmother Otis Painting Restoration.
Oh,
Yeah.
Dinner.
Not a lot of information there.
But she definitely looks like a well-to-do member of Atchison society in that portrait.
Yes.
She sort of does.
I think she would have been in Atchison when the portrait was done.
Yeah.
Well, and that's part of the problem she had too, is watching Muriel and Amelia, jumping fences and climbing trees and stuff, and she was, brought up to be more, I don't know how you say that, ladylike, and they decided, the girls can wear bloomers, and that's another whole thing, you might talk about
I'll talk
that later.
about them a little bit later, like them as parents, and there's just so much information to say to try and condense into one speech. But they were, I mean, they let their dog, like Amelia Harres and Alfred Otis, travel, but and was education was very important to them. Amelia's mother was was not the first woman, but one of the first women to summit Pikes Peak in Colorado. So they definitely weren't, I think they were a little bit more forgiving of like social norms than the rest of, or not the rest of Atchison, but than some of the members of the upper class.
So I'm just being nosy here, but Amelia Earhart's parents, I suppose the Amelia Earhart,
Yes.
her parents.
Yes.
So when she was living in this house, her parents were in Kansas City, is that right?
So Amelia Harres and Alfred Otis gifted their daughter a fully furnished house in Kansas City, Kansas, when she got married. And that's where Amelia Earhart grew up, as well as her sister Muriel. And then they would come out and visit this house on a pretty consistent basis. And they spent summers here and Christmas here. And then for a year and a half to 2 years, Amelia Earhart and Muriel lived in the house and went to school as their parents were trying to set up a house in Des Moines, Iowa. Yeah. So Amelia Earhart was born here in this house and then spent the first kind of 3 months of her life here, was baptized at the Trinity Episcopal Church that her grandfather helped found, and then moved with her parents back to her Kansas City, Kansas house.
I see.
And then she came back.
And then she would visit all the time, yeah.
Oh. Wow.
But
Until 1912, when Amelia Harres and Alfred Otis passed away. This house was sold.
It's remarkable they passed away in the same year.
Yeah, it's an interesting fact. I don't know if they would have do that.
Did they get sick? Do you know how they died?
No, I don't think so.
There might have been some like heart. I'm trying to remember what the obituaries said. But of old age.
Yeah, that's what I thought. I didn't think there was anything major,
No.
just getting older.
so
Sorry.
did Alfred? I mean, you said that he tried to craft his own narrative. Or did he do a autobiography or anything?
He didn't. There is a book on the history of Atchison written in like the 1890s, I believe, that has a chapter on him and other influential members of Atchison. There's that part of that chapter is on the wall in the office across the hall from us. You can also find an online version of that history book if you're interested in learning more about how one person saw Atchison in the 1890s. It's been really interesting.
Was that the Sheffield Angles?
Yes.
Was it?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay. Did you know that Judge Otis and Amelia are buried out at Mount Vernon?
Yes,
And-
as well as she is, and then grandparents are, as well as Mariah Grace and Gavard Harres, I believe, are also buried there, as well as some of the children.
Well, I know there's 2 children that died very young because there was a thing on YouTube where this guy had come and he goes around to different cemeteries and cleans
Oh, yeah.
the stones, and he cleaned 2 of Judge Otis's children's stones that were side by side out there.
Yeah.
And they look very nice
I think
because
they
I've been
had
out there.
7 children,
Yeah,
and then 5, maybe to adulthood. I know they lost their first daughter a year after she was born, right before Alfred enlisted and fought in the Civil War.
I didn't realize he had fought in the Civil War.
It's an interesting piece of just their connection to the Civil War is pretty interesting. There is family stories that he was possibly part of the Underground Railroad. This house wasn't, but that he helped with transportation, and knew people who were active members of the Underground Railroad, and people would come in the house. And Amelia Earhart's mother remembers stories of hearing her father's, Alfred Otis's friends talk about their activity.
Yeah,
That's fascinating.
online it said in this room was a latched door, and one day Brenda that used to work here, she's like, oh, let's go look. I was like, the floor's already done. She looked and was like, oh man.
That would have been interesting.
Yeah, it's possible, but he didn't share that with us.
One of the things that's fascinating to me is that Otis went to law school in Louisville, Kentucky, which is a slave state. And then he lives 2 years in Mississippi, right before the Civil War, which is a slave state, and then decides to move here where that question was open, right? Trying to discuss it, trying to make it as a free state. So yeah, there has to have been something about slavery that drove him
Yeah.
to here. Yeah.
I'm sure glad he did.
I know.
We have a dentist office in town now that changed their name to the Canary.
Yeah.
It was Canary Dental or something. I was like,
Yes.
I'm getting on the Amelia train.
Yes, yes. Yeah. It's Gunnar Sunday's daughter that's judge also.
Yeah.
So he's semi-retired. I talked to him the other day.
Well, thank you, everyone.
Thank you.